Please, turn around. You're riding straight into a trap. Nobody had ever stopped 42 Hells Angels on an open highway. Nobody had ever dared. But a barefoot homeless girl, 19 years old, shaking so hard her teeth rattled, planted herself in the middle of the asphalt and refused to move. She wasn't armed, she wasn't crazy, she was terrified, and she was doing it anyway. That moment would change everything. For the riders, for the girl, and for the man at the front who almost didn't stop in time. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's ride. The sound came first. It always did out here on the desert highway. Before you saw them, before you felt the vibration climb up through the soles of your feet and into your bones, you heard them. 42 motorcycles in close formation made a sound that had no comparison in ordinary life. It wasn't noise exactly. It was something closer to a weather event, a rolling, deepening thunder that swallowed the silence of the open land and replaced it with something primal, something that told every living creature in the vicinity to step aside. They had been riding since before sunrise. Victor Bear Callahan rode point the way he always did. He had earned that position the hard way over 15 years of absolute loyalty and more close calls than he could count on both hands. At 44, Victor had the kind of face that didn't waste energy on unnecessary expression, deep-set eyes the color of old iron, a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same rock as the desert around them. His beard had gone gray at the edges, and he didn't care. The road didn't care what you looked like. The road only cared whether you had the nerve to keep going. He had the nerve. Behind him in two staggered columns rode the rest of his brothers, mechanics and veterans, men who had buried friends and built something from nothing, men who had reasons to be hard and had chosen every single day to be hard together rather than hard alone. The Hells Angels were many things to many people. Victor had stopped trying to explain them to outsiders years ago. You either understood or you didn't. They were heading toward Ridgeline Pass. It was a straight shot through the desert, a stretch of highway Victor had ridden at least 30 times over the years. Flat land transitioning into a long approach curve that bent around the base of a rocky hillside before opening up again into the valley beyond. Nothing unusual about it, nothing that should have put any particular feeling in his gut. And yet, Victor noticed his jaw tighten slightly about 2 miles out. He didn't analyze it. He had learned long ago that his body sometimes knew the things before his mind caught up. He filed the sensation away, kept his eyes moving, and held his speed steady. The sky ahead was pale and clean. No clouds, the kind of morning that felt too quiet. He was still turning that thought over when he saw her. She was maybe 150 yards ahead, standing directly in the center of the lane. Not to the side, not at the shoulder, dead center, and she wasn't moving. She was facing them head-on, both arms extended at her sides, palms out, a gesture so deliberate it stopped his breath for a single hard second. Victor's hand hit the brake. His reaction was automatic, the product of thousands of miles and the reflexes of a man who had survived by trusting his instincts. The front wheel bit the asphalt. The sound behind him changed instantly as 41 other riders responded to his brake light in the chain reaction that trained riders know the way. Musicians know a key change. Steel and rubber and controlled force 42 times over the whole formation, pulling up hard and tight, the thunder collapsing into a low, rumbling growl and then silence. They stopped with less than 6 feet between the front wheel and her bare feet. 6 feet. Bare feet. Victor stared. She was young. He registered that first. Young in the way that made his chest feel strange. Not 19 going on 30 the way hard streets sometimes made people look, but genuinely 19 soft-faced with tangled blonde hair that hadn't been properly washed in what looked like several days. She was wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt that was 2 sizes too large and jeans that had been mended at the knee with different thread. She had no shoes. The asphalt under her feet was already warming in the morning sun, and she was standing on it like she didn't feel it, or like she had decided that the feeling didn't matter. She was shaking, not performing, not posturing. She was physically shaking, the tremor visible, even from where Victor sat, her hands still extended at her sides in that strange open gesture, like she was showing him she was unarmed and had nothing to hide. He pulled off his helmet. Behind him, he could feel the weight of 41 men watching, waiting, reading his lead. That was how it worked. He was point. Whatever happened next was his call. He swung off the bike and stood. He was 6'3" and 240 pounds, and he had been told more than once that he was not the kind of man most people wanted to walk toward when he was unhappy. He walked toward her. She held her ground. That was the thing that got him. She held it. Her chin came up slightly and her eyes gray. He noticed gray with dark rings under them, stayed on his face and didn't look away. She was terrified. He could see that clearly. But she wasn't running and she wasn't collapsing, and she was not moving out of the road. Victor stopped 4 feet in front of her. He looked at her for a long moment. The desert air was still around them. Somewhere behind him, he heard Dex Harmon, his road captain, step off his own bike. That was good. Dex had good instincts. Victor spoke first. You have about 10 seconds to explain what you think you're doing. His voice was low, deliberate. He didn't shout. He had learned that the quieter you spoke, the more people listened. She took one audible breath. He watched her swallow, and then she said it. Please turn around. You're riding straight into a trap. The words came out fast and controlled, like she had been rehearsing them in her head the whole time she stood there waiting for them. Her voice was steadier than her hands. Victor stared at her. A trap. Yes. She glanced past him at the road ahead, then brought her eyes back. Around the curve, past the rock face. There are men in the hills on both sides, armed. I saw them when I was looking for food this morning. I saw the guns. I heard them talking about a group of bikers coming through this highway today. She paused. They said 42. The number dropped into the silence between them like a stone into still water. Victor did not move. He heard Dex inhale sharply behind him. He kept his eyes on the girl. Say that number again. 42. Her voice didn't waver. They said exactly 42 riders. That's not a guess. I heard them count it. Victor's mind was already running calculations. Who knew the size of this run? Who had access to that number? It was not general knowledge. It was the kind of number that lived in internal communications and secure channels, in conversations between trusted brothers. 42 was not a figure a random person would stumble across. What's your name? Lily. Last name? A slight hesitation. Marsh. How long have you been out here, Lily Marsh? Since yesterday morning. I was trying to cut across to the Route 9 on-ramp. She glanced down at her bare feet for just a moment, then back up. I lost my shoes crossing a dry creek bed 2 nights ago. The rocks cut them up. Victor looked at her feet then. He looked at them for exactly 2 seconds. There were scrapes on both soles, the kind that came from walking on rough ground without protection, already dried and dark. She had been out here for a while. He turned around. Dex? Dex Harmon was already there, 40 years old, built like a former welterweight, which he was, with quick, dark eyes and a nose that had been broken twice in the line of duty, so to speak. He and Victor had been riding together for 12 years. They could hold an entire conversation without opening their mouths. Victor tilted his head toward the curve ahead. Dex read it instantly. He turned and jerked his chin at 2 of the younger riders, Marcus Webb and a man called Rook, who had done 2 tours in the military before patching in. They were Victor's scouts without ever having been formally named that. They moved. Victor turned back to Lily. You're going to stay exactly here. You're not going to move. You're not going to walk toward the bikes, and you're not going to walk toward the curve. You're going to stand right here and wait. She blinked. I'm not trying to set anything up. I know, Victor said. She stopped. I know, he said again, and his voice had changed just slightly, not softer exactly, but different, more direct. I'm not doubting you. I'm following protocol. My men are going ahead to verify what you told me. If you're right, we'll deal with it. If you're wrong, we'll have a different conversation. Either way, you stand here. Lily looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once. Victor walked back toward the formation. The men were waiting. 41 pairs of eyes ranging from openly suspicious to carefully neutral, all tracking him as he moved. He could feel the temperature of their attention the way you could feel heat off asphalt on a July afternoon. He stopped in front of them. The girl says there's a setup around the curve. Armed positions in the hills, road obstacles, planned ambush. He said it flat, no editorializing. Scouts are running a check. We wait. Donnie Reyes, who had been with the club for 9 years and had the suspicious nature of a man who had been burned before, spoke up from his bike. She walked out of nowhere and drops exactly the right number. Bear. That's not random. No, Victor agreed. It's not. That could mean she's on the level, or it could mean the information was given to her deliberately to slow us down while somebody moves into position behind us. I know what it could mean. So why are we trusting? I didn't say we were trusting her. I said we're verifying. Victor looked at Donnie steadily. Those are different things, you know that. Donnie closed his mouth. Victor walked back to stand near Lily, not directly next to her, but close enough that his presence communicated something clear to his men. This girl was not going to be threatened while they waited. That was not a conversation he was going to have with anyone today. He looked at her sidelong. How long were you up in those hills? She had wrapped her arms around herself. The shaking had lessened slightly, but it hadn't stopped. I found a spot under an overhang to sleep last night. It was still dark when I started moving this morning. I heard them before I saw them. They were using flashlights setting things up. I crawled closer to get a better look, and I heard them talking. She stopped. I shouldn't have crawled closer. I know that was stupid. What did they look like? 5 men that I could count. Maybe more on the other side of the road. They had rifles. They had rope, the thick kind, for blocking the road. And there was something on the road itself. I couldn't see it clearly, but they kept checking it. Victor nodded slowly. None of that was impossible. None of it was the kind of specific detail that someone would include in a fabricated story meant to lure a convoy into a secondary trap. It was too operational, too boring to be invented, and that boring specificity was actually the most credible thing about it. She kept going without being asked. They mentioned a name. The person who ordered it, they said it twice. I didn't recognize it. Graves, does that mean anything to you? Victor's face went still. In 15 years, he had become very good at not reacting to things in front of other people. He had trained himself out of visible responses, the way some men train themselves out of flinching. But that name, that specific name, moved through him like a cold wire pulled taut from his throat to his stomach. He said nothing. Lily was watching his face. It means something to you. It's a name I know, he said carefully. Is this person capable of... She gestured vaguely at the curve ahead. Yes, Victor said. And that was all he said. Graves, the name sat in his mind the way a splinter sits under skin's sharp specific present. Clayton Graves had been many things over the years. He had been a business associate. He had been a rival. He had been for a period of approximately 18 months that Victor tried not to think about too often, something that might have been called a friend, though that word was imprecise for the kind of relationship they'd had. And then he had become something else entirely. He had become the reason for a legal battle that had cost the club 3 men and a great deal of money. And he had walked away from that battle believing apparently that the score had not been settled to his satisfaction. That was 3 years ago. Victor had thought the silence meant the matter was finished. He was apparently wrong. Marcus Webb came back first. He was moving fast on foot, crouched low, and the way he was moving told Victor everything he needed to know before the man opened his mouth. Marcus stopped in front of him and said 3 words. She's not wrong. The words went through the group like a physical thing. Victor looked at Marcus and waited. Road cable strung low across the asphalt around the bend, the kind that takes down a front wheel at speed. Rock piles on both shoulders for cover. At least 6 shooters on the north hillside, probably more on the south, but Rook's still working that angle. They're set up professional. Marcus paused. If we had ridden through that curve at cruising speed, the cable would have taken down the front bikes and the rest would have piled in. They had clear sight lines to the road from both hills. Another pause. Nobody would have made it. The desert went very quiet. Victor turned to look at Lily. She was standing exactly where he'd told her to stand, arms wrapped around herself, eyes moving between him and Marcus, reading the exchange with the attentiveness of someone who had spent years learning to read situations by the body language of people who didn't want to be read. You heard all of that, Victor asked her. She nodded. Do you understand what it means? It means I was right. It means if you hadn't stepped into the road, Bethel, Victor said, 42 men would be dead right now. Lily said nothing for a moment. Her jaw worked slightly. She looked down at her bare feet on the warm asphalt. Then she looked back up, and her eyes were very bright, and her voice was slightly unsteady when she spoke. I know what it feels like when nobody stops, she said. I wasn't going to let that happen if I could do something about it. Victor looked at her for a long time. Around him, the weight of 41 men listening pressed against the silence. He thought about what she had just said. He turned it over. He thought about a 19-year-old girl alone in the desert hills with no shoes, hearing armed men and making the decision not to disappear into the brush and wait for the danger to pass. She could have. That would have been the rational thing, the safe thing. Nobody would have blamed her. Nobody even knew she was there. She had chosen differently. She had walked down out of those hills in bare feet and planted herself in the middle of a highway and waited for 42 motorcycles to come around the bend, knowing full well what they looked like and what they were and how this could go. "How long were you standing in that road before we came around?" he asked. "About 20 minutes, she said quietly. 20 minutes. I didn't know how fast you'd be traveling. I needed to be in position early enough that you'd have time to stop." Victor rubbed the back of his neck. Dex had come to stand beside him, and he heard the road captain exhale slowly through his nose. "What do we do with the information about Graves?" Dex asked low. "We deal with it," Victor said. "But first we deal with the situation on that hillside." He raised his voice slightly, turning back toward the group. "Rook's still on reconnaissance. Nobody moves until we have full eyes on both positions. We know about the cable. We know about the north hillside positions. We wait for south." Donnie Reyes spoke up again. His tone had changed from what it had been 10 minutes ago. "That rope set up a cable that low across a highway curve. That's not a warning. That's an execution." "Yes," Victor said. "Graves wants us gone. All of us." "Yes." "Why now?" "After 3 years," Victor looked at him, "because he thinks he found a window. And because men like that, when they decide to act, they go all the way." He paused. He didn't plan to leave survivors. The weight of that settled over the group. 41 men with 41 different histories and 41 different reasons for being here, and every one of them understanding in that moment what they had almost ridden into. The morning had gone from ordinary to something that none of them would forget. Lily had sat down on the asphalt shoulder while they talked. Not dramatically, she just lowered herself cross-legged into the ground, like her legs had decided they had done enough work for the moment. She was rubbing absently at her right foot, running her thumb along one of the scrapes on the sole. One of the younger riders, a big man named Colt, who was 26 and still had some softness in his face that the road hadn't fully hardened, yet broke formation without asking permission, and walked to his saddlebag. He pulled out a protein bar and a bottle of water and walked to where Lily was sitting and crouched down in front of her. "Here," he said. She looked at the bar and the water. Then she looked at Colt's face, and something happened in her expression that Victor watched closely, a kind of involuntary flinching, like she was bracing for it to be taken back, or for there to be a catch. A split second of guard. Then she took them. "Thank you," she said quietly. "When did you last eat?" Colt asked. She thought about it. "Yesterday afternoon. I found some crackers in a gas station trash can off the 9. Colt said nothing. He just nodded and straightened up and went back to his bike. Victor caught his eye briefly and gave it nothing, but that was its own kind of acknowledgement between them. Rook came back from his reconnaissance 12 minutes later. He appeared from the brush at the roadside, moving the way men who had been trained to move in dangerous places moved, quiet, efficient, unhurried at the surface, even when everything underneath was running fast. He came directly to Victor. "South Hillside has 4 positions," Rook said. "Better concealed than the north side. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. They're not street guys. The positions are too disciplined. Military trained or close to it." He paused. "There's also a vehicle at the far end of the curve pulled off the road with a clear sight line to the kill zone. Driver and 1 passenger. Probably the command position coordinating the operation and ready to confirm the outcome." "Communication between positions?" Victor asked. "Radios, short range. They'll know when the cable triggers the first bikes." Victor stood with that for a moment. 10 positions, at least 10 shooters, a command vehicle, a road trap designed to eliminate forward momentum and channel the group into a concentrated area under fire from both hillsides. It was not impulsive. It was planned by someone who had thought carefully about the physics of what they were trying to accomplish. Clayton Graves had spent 3 years thinking about this. 3 years. And he had been patient and methodical and professional about it, the way he had been patient and methodical about everything in his life. Victor had once admired that quality in the man. Standing on a desert highway that had almost become a graveyard, he felt something considerably different about it now. They don't know we're on to them, Victor said. No, Rook confirmed. We were careful. They're still in position waiting. Victor turned to Dex. Okay, he said. Here's how we do this. What followed was 20 minutes of quiet, intensely focused planning that Victor and his men had done in different forms many times before. Not because they went looking for conflict, but because they had learned over years of living a life that existed adjacent to danger, that the ability to think clearly under pressure was the difference between men who came home and men who didn't. The plan was straightforward. It needed to be. Complicated plans broke apart under the pressure of execution. What worked was simple, clean, and left room for judgment in the moment. Two groups would move through the brush on foot, working toward the hillside positions from angles the shooters couldn't see. Victor would lead the northern approach with Rook and 6 other men. Dex would take the southern side with a matching number. The remaining riders would hold position on the road as a visual anchor, keeping things looking normal from the command vehicle's vantage point, suggesting that nothing had changed, that the convoy was simply stopped and might resume any moment. Timing would be the critical element. Both groups had to move simultaneously. If the northern positions were approached first and alerted, the southern shooters would adapt immediately. It all had to happen at once. They went over it twice. Victor asked questions. His men asked questions back. Adjustments were made. Assignments were clear. Then Victor walked back to where Lily was sitting. She had finished the protein bar and was holding the empty water bottle in both hands. She looked up at him. We're going to handle this, he said. I know, she said. You are going to stay here. Same instruction as before. You don't move toward the curve. You don't go back up the hillside. You stay within eyesight of the men on the road. He paused. There are going to be sounds that will make you want to move. Don't. Lily looked at him steadily. How many people are up there? Enough. And Graves, the person who ordered this, he won't be on a hillside with a rifle, Victor said. Men like that don't do their own work. He'll be somewhere clean and comfortable waiting for confirmation. He looked down at her for a moment. When this is finished, I'm going to need you to tell me everything you heard. Every word. Exactly. Okay. The specific words matter. I have a good memory, Lily said. There was something in her voice when she said it, flat and factual, not prideful, the tone of someone reporting a survival skill rather than a credential. 2 years on the street, you learn to remember things correctly, what people say, where they said it, what time it was. Details keep you safe. Victor looked at her. 2 years. Yes, he didn't ask the follow-up question. Not now, but he kept it. 2 years on the street, 19 years old. That math put her at the streets at 17, which meant something had happened before the streets, and whatever it was, had been significant enough that sleeping under a desert overhang and eating crackers from a trash can was the preferable alternative. He had known men who had survived things that should have destroyed them. He had watched what that kind of survival did to a person. Sometimes it made them hard in the wrong ways, brittle, closed-off, reactive. And sometimes the rarer version, the version he had only seen in a handful of people over the course of his life, it made them into something unusual, something with a clarity of purpose and a depth of understanding that people who had never been tested simply didn't carry. He looked at Lily Marsh sitting on the asphalt shoulder of a desert highway with scraped bare feet in someone else's oversized sweatshirt, and he filed away what he was thinking. Then he went to do what needed to be done. The operation took 34 minutes. In the end, the men on those hillsides, 10 in total, as Rook had counted, found themselves in the strange and disorienting position of the ambush hunter who realizes he is the one being hunted. Victor's group came over the north ridge from above and behind, coming down into the positions from a direction that the shooters had never considered covering. Dex's group materialized from the south hillside brush with a precision that Rook later described as the product of 2 tours in places where getting it wrong had permanent consequences. There were no shots fired. That was important to Victor, not because he lacked the nerve for it, but because shots created questions, and questions created complications, and the real business of this day, the business of Clayton Graves and what came next, was not going to be served by complications. The 10 men were disarmed and restrained in the middle of the highway, sitting in a row on the asphalt, in the shadow of the rocky curve they had planned to use as a killing ground. The command vehicle was blocked in by 3 bikes before the driver could react, and the 2 men inside were removed without incident. Victor stood in front of the row of seated men and looked at them one at a time. You were told 42, he said. Somebody gave you good operational intelligence. Whoever told you that number knew what they were talking about. Nobody spoke. That's all right, Victor said. You don't need to tell me who gave the orders. I already know. He looked at the man at the end of the row. He was different from the others, a little older, a little more composed in the way that people who have been caught before and survived it are composed. The man who had been in the command vehicle. You have a way to reach graves, Victor said. The man looked at him. That's not a question, Victor said. A long moment. Then the man gave a short, tight nod. You're going to use it, Victor said. You're going to tell him the operation went as planned. You're going to tell him to expect confirmation of completion by end of day. The man held his gaze. And if I don't? Victor looked at him without heat or particular hostility, the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved in his head. Then I have a different conversation with you about the things I know about Clayton Graves and the things you clearly know about Clayton Graves, and we'll see where that conversation leads. Those conversations tend to get complicated. He paused. The message is simpler. The man thought about it. He made the call. Victor walked back to where the main group had reassembled on the road. Lily was on her feet, standing exactly where he had told her to stand, watching everything with those gray eyes that processed information and gave back very little of what they found. When he walked back to her, she searched his face. It's done, she asked. First part, he said. There's a second part. There's always a second part, Victor said. He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, and he thought about the image of her standing in the middle of this highway 20 minutes before they had arrived, having made her decision, waiting for 42 motorcycles to round the bend. How did you know we'd stop? He asked. It was the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind since the beginning. Lily was quiet for a moment. She looked down the empty highway in the direction they had come from, then back at him. I didn't know for certain, she said, but I thought that if I got low enough and there was no way to go around me without running me over, most people would stop. She paused. I was hoping you were most people. Victor absorbed that. And if we hadn't... She was quiet for a moment. Her jaw tightened slightly. Then I'd have been wrong about people, she said. But at least I'd have tried. He stared at her. He thought about the 41 men behind him. He thought about everything they had built together, all the years and all the miles and all the things they had survived. And he thought about how all of it had come down to whether this girl's read on human nature was accurate. It had been. Come on, he said. Lily looked at him. Where, away from the road, Victor said, we need to eat and you need shoes, and then we have a lot to talk about. She blinked. Something crossed her face that was hard to name, surprise maybe, or the specific kind of uncertainty that came from not being included in things very often and not quite trusting it when it happened. Okay, she said. She said it quietly like she was being careful with it. Victor walked back toward the formation, and after a moment, Lily Marsh fell in beside him, barefoot on the warm asphalt, moving toward whatever came next. They pulled off the highway onto a wide dirt shoulder, about a mile back from the curve, far enough from the restrained men to have a conversation without being heard close enough that Rook and two others could keep eyes on the situation without losing contact. Victor had learned years ago that the period after a crisis was often more dangerous than the crisis itself. Adrenaline made people careless. Relief made people drop their guard. He didn't allow either in his group. Dex had the camp stove out of one of the support bags within 4 minutes. He was that kind of man, the kind who understood that a group of people who had just narrowly avoided dying needed hot coffee and food more than they needed a tactical debrief, and that both things could happen at the same time. He didn't ask anyone's preference. He just started the water heating and laid out what they had, and men drifted toward it the way people drifted toward warmth without quite deciding to. Lily stood slightly apart from the group. Victor noticed. He noticed the specific way she positioned herself, close enough to observe, far enough that she couldn't be accused of inserting herself, her weight distributed evenly on her feet, in the unconscious posture of someone who had spent a long time being ready to move. She was watching the men interact with each other with an expression that was careful and attentive, and something else underneath that he couldn't immediately name. He walked to Dex and said low, "Get her a pair of socks and something for her feet from the emergency kit, and whatever food we have that's real." Dex glanced at Lily, then back at Victor. Already on it. That was another thing about Dex. He had usually already thought of the thing you were about to ask for. Victor carried 2 cups of coffee across the space between the group and where Lily was standing and held one out to her without preamble. She took it with both hands. She was still shaking slightly. He noticed the surface of the coffee trembling in the cup, and she wrapped her palms around the warmth with the focused gratitude of someone for whom warmth was not a given. He stood next to her and drank his own coffee and looked out at the desert and let the silence run for a moment, which was something he almost never did with people he didn't know well. He was a man who moved deliberately in conversations, who measured questions and timing with the same care he applied to anything that mattered. "You said 2 years," he said. Lily took a sip of coffee. "Yes." "How old were you when it started?" 17, Graham. "What happened at 17? She was quiet for a beat. Not evasive, he could read the difference. She was sorting through how to say something true in a way that didn't ask for more than she was ready to offer. "My stepfather," she said finally. "He and my mother had been together since I was 12. At first it was fine, then it wasn't. Then it got bad enough that one night I made a choice. I could stay and see what happened next, or I could leave." She paused. "I left." "Was there family? Someone you could have gone to?" "My grandmother in Ohio, but she was sick, end stage. I didn't want to land on her when she was already—" She stopped and looked into her coffee cup. "She died 8 months after I left. I heard about it through a cousin who messaged me." Victor said nothing. "But Puma," Lily continued, "no family after that, and I was on the street already by then, so." The way she said so, like it was a punctuation mark, like it closed off a corridor she had already walked through and examined and made her peace with, told Victor something specific about her. She was not asking him to feel sorry for her. She was explaining sequence of events. That was different from asking for something. 2 years is a long time, he said. "It's long enough to learn things," she said. "How to find food, how to stay warm, which people to avoid, and which ones will look at you like you're not there, which is most of them." She glanced at him sideways. "Most people, when they see someone my age sitting on the ground outside a convenience store or a bus station, they don't see a person in a bad situation. They see a problem. They look away because looking makes them feel guilty, and guilty is uncomfortable." Victor looked at her. "Is that what you expected from us, that we'd look away?" "No," she said. "I didn't think you'd look away. I thought you might run me over." The corner of her mouth moved in something that was almost dry humor. "I figured the worst realistic outcome was you'd stop being angry and then drive around me. And that would be," she paused, "that would have been hard to live with, but I'd have survived it. I've survived harder things." Victor thought about that. A 19-year-old girl doing a risk calculation in her head while she stood barefoot on a desert highway waiting for motorcycles. The worst outcome she was willing to accept. The thing she would have had to live with. Dex appeared at his elbow with a pair of clean socks from the first aid kit and a folded piece of cloth that Victor recognized as a spare bandana from someone's bag laid flat and used as a makeshift wrap under the socks to protect the scraped soles. He crouched in front of Lily without any ceremony and looked up at her. "Can I take a look at your feet?" Lily blinked. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He held her gaze. "Can I?" She hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then she shifted her weight and lifted her right foot slightly. Dex cleaned and wrapped both feet with the same focused competence he brought to everything, asking 2 questions. "Does that hurt? How's the pressure?" and getting brief answers. When he was done, he helped her into the socks and straightened up. "You'll need actual shoes when we get somewhere," he said, "but that'll hold for now." Lily looked down at her wrapped feet, and then she looked at Dex, and again Victor caught that involuntary flinching expression, the bracing for the catch that was the residue of 2 years of learning, that kindness usually had a price. When no price came, she looked slightly undone by it. Just for a second. Then her face steadied. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was careful. Dex just nodded and walked back toward the camp stove. Victor watched Lily watch him go. "You're trying to figure out what we want from you," he said. She turned to look at him. She didn't deny it. "That's a reasonable thing to try to figure out," he said. "Here's the answer information. You heard those men talking this morning. I need everything, not the summary version, the actual words, the actual sequence. Details you might not think are important probably are. That's what I need from you." Lily straightened slightly. Having a task to perform visibly organized something in her. Her shoulders settled. Her breathing evened out and her eyes took on the particular steadiness of a person who had just been given something concrete to do. "Okay," she said, "from the beginning, from whenever you first heard anything." She started talking. She had been bedded down in a shallow overhang in the rocky hillside above the highway. She had found it 2 nights before and returned to it because it gave shelter from the wind and couldn't be seen from the road. She described finding it with a level of geographic precision that confirmed she had been navigating that terrain on foot for longer than just a couple of days. She talked about waking in the early dark to the sound of vehicles not on the highway, but on a dirt service track that ran behind the ridge, which meant the men had come in from the opposite side so they wouldn't be visible from the road. She had heard them before she saw them. She counted what she could by sound first, at least 4 vehicles, multiple voices, equipment being moved. She said she had thought initially that it was utility, work, road maintenance, something ordinary. Then she heard the word rifles said clearly and without lowering the voice, and her body had gone absolutely still under the overhang. After that, she told Victor, "I stopped thinking about whether I should listen. I just listened." She had heard the name Graves twice. The first time from a man she described as older, gray-haired, with a voice that carried the kind of authority that didn't raise itself. She described it as the kind of voice you felt more than heard. The second time from a younger man who seemed to be running through the operational checklist, confirming that the plan was set and all positions accounted for. "What exactly did the older one say about Graves?" Victor asked. Lily's eyes went slightly distant in the way they did when she was pulling from memory precisely rather than paraphrasing. "He said Graves confirmed the number this morning. 42 riders, no outriders, no vehicle escort. We won't get a cleaner setup than this." And then he said something like, "When it's done, you call me first, not Graves. Me first." And the younger one said, "Yes, sir." Victor was very still. Dex, who had drifted back within earshot, said quietly, "Me first, not Graves." Victor looked at him. "That means Graves isn't running this himself," Dex said. "There's someone above him." It was the thing Victor had been turning over since she'd said it, and hearing Dex say it out loud confirmed that he wasn't reading it wrong. Clayton Graves was not the architect. Clayton Graves was the client, which meant that whatever this was, it was larger than a 3-year-old grudge. A man with a grudge hired somebody local and messy. A man with a grudge did not hire what Rook had described as disciplined, military-trained shooters with professional positioning and radio coordination. That required connections that Graves, for all his money and all his spite, did not have on his own. Someone had given Graves access to something, or someone had used Graves's grudge as an opportunity for their own purpose. Victor kept his face even. He was recalculating behind his eyes the way he had learned to recalculate quickly when the map turned out to be wrong. "What else?" he asked Lily. "There was one more thing," she said. One of the younger men, he made a comment before the older one shut him down. He said something like, "After this, are we going to the other locations?" And the older one said, "That's not your concern. Focus on today." "But it made me think," she stopped. "Other locations," Victor repeated. "That's what he said." Victor looked at Dex. Dex looked back. Other locations. Not a single operation. A sequence. Victor set his coffee cup down on the edge of the nearest saddlebag and turned away from Lily for a moment. He took 4 steps and stopped and looked out at the desert for exactly the length of time it took to think through the immediate implications. Then he turned back. "You remembered all of that word for word," he said to Lily, "from this morning." "I told you, I have a good memory." "Most people summarize. They remember the meaning but not the words." "I know." She met his eyes. "I started doing it deliberately about 6 months into the street, remembering exact words. Because there were situations, places I stayed, people who offered things where it mattered exactly what someone said versus what they claimed they said later. The exact words protected me a few times." She paused. "So I practiced it." Victor stared at her. He had been around skilled people his entire adult life, men who were gifted with their hands with strategy, with the ability to read situations and people. He had rarely encountered someone who had taught themselves out of pure survival necessity the discipline of perfect recall. It was not a skill most people even recognize as a skill. It was the kind of thing that lived in courtrooms and intelligence work and a few exceptional human beings who understood that truth is slippery and precision is the only grip on it. A 19-year-old homeless girl had developed it on a desert sidewalk to keep herself safe. He filed that away with the same care he had been filing everything about her since the moment she'd stepped into the road. "You did good," he said. It wasn't effusive. It wasn't delivered with warmth or flourish. He said it the way he said things that he meant flatly directly as a statement of fact. But Lily looked at him as if he had said something considerably larger than those 3 words, and she looked away quickly after back at the desert, her jaw working slightly. The men had drifted into loose conversation around the camp stove. Victor could hear the register of it, the particular tone of men who have come down from high alert and are sorting through what happened with the specific black humor and matter-of-fact exchange that was their way of processing. He caught pieces of it. He always did. Rook was telling Marcus about the moment the North Hillside shooters had realized they were surrounded, the specific frozen quality of that realization the second when men who believe they are in control of a situation discover that they aren't. Marcus was asking questions with the interest of a man taking notes for future reference. Colt was sitting apart from the main conversation, quiet, which was unusual for him. Victor made a mental note. Donnie Reyes had walked up to stand near Lily at some point, and Victor tracked that approach with half his attention. Donnie stopped a few feet from her and crossed his arms. He was not a small man, and he had a face that had been arranged by experience into a permanent expression of skepticism. He looked at Lily for a moment without speaking. "I said you might be part of the setup," he said, "when we were waiting." Lily looked at him. "I heard. Bear disagreed with me." "I know." Donnie was quiet for a second. "I've been wrong before," he said. "I'll say it. I was wrong today." He uncrossed his arms and extended his right hand. Lily looked at the hand. Then she looked at Donnie's face. Then she shook his hand once firm. "You were being careful," she said. "That's not wrong." Donnie looked slightly surprised. He nodded once and walked back toward the group. Victor had watched that whole exchange. He looked away before Lily could notice him watching. He pulled Rook aside. "The men we have restrained," Victor said. "You said military trained or close to it. Or former law enforcement," Rook said. "The discipline in those positions wasn't civilian. Somebody trained them, or they came already trained. Which contractors run operations like this in this region?" Rook thought about it. He was not a man who spoke before he was ready, which was another thing Victor valued about him. "There are 2 outfits I can think of that have the personnel profile for this. One operates mostly out of Nevada's private security, but not the retail kind, the kind that works for people who need things done without paperwork. The other I've seen connected to 3 separate incidents in the past 2 years, never directly named, always a degree removed." He paused. "That second one has a name that moves in certain circles. Meridian Group." The name meant nothing to Victor yet. "See what you can find," he said, quietly. "Use the channels we trust." Rook nodded and moved away. Victor turned to find Lily standing nearby. She had heard the name. "Meridian," she said. "You know it?" "No." She shook her head. "But the older man, the one who said me first, he had a patch on his jacket. Not a biker patch, more like a logo. I didn't recognize it at the time, but it was a simple design, an M inside a circle." Victor looked at her for a long moment. "An M inside a circle. You're sure about that?" "I'm sure about what I saw," Lily said simply. This was the moment. Victor could feel the shape of it, the way you could feel a change in weather before it arrived, a shift in pressure, the air getting heavier. What had started as Clayton Graves' personal vendetta had just opened into something considerably more serious. A private military contractor with regional reach, multiple operations plan, a client list that likely did not begin and end with Graves. This was not a problem you solved today on a desert highway by restraining 10 hired shooters and sending a false confirmation call. This was the beginning of something longer. He turned to face the group. "Listen up." The conversations died quickly. 41 men turned toward him. "What happened this morning is not finished. What we dealt with out here is one piece of a larger picture, and we're still filling in that picture. That means we do not go back to normal operations until we understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." He looked at them steadily. "We're going to need to move together, stay together, and we're going to need to operate clean for the next 72 hours. No outside communication on open channels. Nothing about today goes anywhere until I say it does." He let that sit for a second. "Any questions?" Donnie raised his voice from the back. "Graves, what's the plan there?" "Graves thinks we're dead right now," Victor said. That's useful. We let him keep thinking it while we build the picture. When we move on, Graves will know everything there is to know first. And the 10 guys we've got sitting on the asphalt, they'll be turned over, Victor said, anonymously and carefully to people who are equipped to deal with them. We're not running that play ourselves. Nods around the group. That was how it was supposed to work. There were systems, and the systems existed for reasons, and using them protected everybody. Victor looked at Lily. She was standing at the edge of the group, having drifted in slightly during his address, without quite seeming to notice she'd done it. She caught his glance and straightened slightly, preparing to step back. He didn't let her. "You're part of this now," he said. It wasn't loud, it was directed at her specifically. "Not because you have to be, because you know things we need, and because out here is not a safe place for you to be alone right now. Anyone connected to Meridian is going to want to know who saw them this morning." Lily went very still. Victor waited. "They might already know," she said quietly. "That's possible. If they saw me, then you being with 42 people is considerably safer than you being alone," he said. "That's not a hard calculation." She was quiet for a moment. He could see her working through it, not the logic of what he'd said, which was straightforward, but the weight of what it meant to say yes to something like that. 2 years of handling everything herself. 2 years of being the only person in charge of her own survival, making every call alone, trusting nobody beyond the immediate and verifiable. Saying yes to this was stepping away from the only way of operating she developed that actually worked. He understood that. He'd been in his own version of that place once, a long time ago. He didn't push. He let her sit with it. Colt spoke up from where he'd been sitting apart from the others. His voice was quieter than usual. "For what it's worth, you saved my life today. I'm not saying that to make you feel like you owe us something you don't. I'm saying it because it's true, and it seemed like something you should hear from someone directly." He looked at her. "We're not going to leave you out here. That's not a threat. It's just that's not something we're going to do." Lily looked at Colt for a long time. Something happened in her face that Victor had not seen there before. Not the brittle steadiness of someone managing their own fear, not the watchful calculation of a person doing risk assessment. Something younger and more unguarded moved across her expression and then was quickly contained, but it had been there. She looked at the ground for a moment. "Okay," she said, "just that." Victor nodded once and turned back to the logistics of what needed to happen next. They needed to move within the hour. The false confirmation call had bought them a window, but a man like whoever ran Meridian would have his own protocols for confirming outcomes. At some point today, someone would go to check on what was supposed to be a highway full of bodies and find instead 10 restrained operatives in an empty road, and from that moment on, the window would close. Victor organized the next hour with the same efficiency he applied to everything. The restrained men were transported in the support vehicle to a meeting point Victor had used before, a location that connected to the right people without connecting to the wrong ones. Rook placed 3 calls on secured channels to 3 separate sources, asking careful questions in coded language that would produce answers by nightfall. Dex coordinated the movement of the larger group, keeping formation tight, running a counter-surveillance route that added 40 minutes to their travel time and was worth every one of those minutes. Through all of it, Lily stayed near Victor's line of sight without being asked to. She watched how his men operated the communication, the coordination, the absence of wasted motion, with that careful observational stillness that he was coming to understand was simply her default state. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She didn't offer commentary. When something required her specifically, when Rook came back with a follow-up question about the description of the gray-haired man, when Marcus wanted her to confirm a detail about the vehicle positions, she answered with the same precise, unhurried accuracy she had brought to her initial account. At one point, while they were waiting for a confirmation call from one of Rook's contacts, Victor found himself standing near her and not speaking for a few minutes, which was unusual for him in operational mode. He was almost always either talking or moving, but there was something in the quality of her silence that didn't require filling. "You've been watching Colt," he said eventually. Lily glanced at him. "He's been quiet since it ended. That's different from how he was before." Victor looked across at Colt, who was still slightly separate from the main conversation, spinning his phone slowly in one hand and not looking at it. "He's 26, Victor said. "He's been in the club 2 years. Today was the first time he's been in something where the actual outcome was," he paused, where the math of it was as clear as it was. Lily understood immediately. He's thinking about what would have happened. Yes. I know what that feels like, she said. When you first understand how close something was, the real version of it, not just the words. She looked at Colt. Does he have someone to talk to? Victor considered the question, which was not the kind of question he usually received. He has brothers. That's not the same as someone to talk to, Lily said. Victor looked at her. She caught his expression and pulled back slightly. Sorry, that's not my... No, he said. You're right, it's not the same. She looked at him, slightly surprised that he'd agreed with her. He walked over to Colt and sat down next to him on the running board of the support vehicle. He didn't say anything immediately. He sat there in the way that meant he was there, which was different from a conversation, and he waited. Colt turned the phone over in his hands. I keep doing the math, he said. I know. If she hadn't been there. I know. All of us, Colt said. Not just everyone. Yes. Colt was quiet for a moment. How do you put something like that away? Like practically, how do people do that? Victor thought about it honestly. You don't put it away, he said. You make room for it. It goes in with everything else you've learned about how things actually are versus how you thought they were. And then you use it. Use it how? To make better calls. To remember that the difference between what happened and what almost happened is usually one decision by one person who chose to act instead of look the other way. He paused. Today, it was a 19-year-old girl with no shoes. Yesterday, it was something else. Tomorrow, it'll be something else again. You remember those things. They make you less complacent. Colt was quiet. Then he said, she's something, huh? Yeah, Victor said. She is. He stood up and walked back. Rook's confirmation came in at the 2-hour mark. The first piece of real intelligence on Meridian Group, not complete, not definitive, but enough to confirm that Rook's initial read had been accurate. Meridian was real regional and connected, and the current operation was not their only active engagement. Victor absorbed the information without showing what it did to him. It did quite a lot. He turned to Dex. We need to get to Hendricks tonight. Dex knew exactly who that was and what it meant. That's a 5-hour ride. I know. You want to go in tonight? Tonight. Dex nodded and started reorganizing the formation logistics without being asked anything further. Victor walked to where Lily was standing. We're moving, he said. 5-hour ride to a location where we can get off the road and have proper conversations with proper people about all of this. He looked at her. You're going to need to ride with someone. Is that all right? Lily looked at the motorcycles. She had the expression of someone who had never been on one and was calculating the variables. Who are you? She asked. Colt, Victor said, unless you'd rather not. She thought about it for about 3 seconds. Colt's fine, she said. Victor walked toward his bike and then stopped without turning around. Lily. Yeah. What you heard this morning about other locations. He kept his voice even. I need you to understand that it's possible that what you stumbled into today is larger than the 42 of us. It's possible that other people are in danger and don't know it yet. The information you're carrying matters for reasons beyond today. Silence behind him. I know, she said finally. Her voice was steady. That's why I stepped into the road. He stood there for one more second. Then he swung onto his bike. The formation assembled with the practiced efficiency of long routine. Engines turned over in sequence, the sound building from 1 to 42 until it was the kind of thunder that rewrote the silence and reminded the desert that human beings were passing through with something to say about their presence. Lily climbed on behind. Colt gripped the back of his jacket with both hands and didn't look like she was about to fall off. She looked like a person learning a new thing and deciding in real time that she was capable of it. Victor pulled out first. The road opened up ahead of him, long and clean and empty, the curve that should have killed them all safely behind them, now growing smaller in the mirrors until it was gone. He thought about the name Meridian. He thought about Clayton Graves waiting somewhere comfortable for a confirmation call that was never going to come. He thought about other locations said casually by a man who hadn't known he was being listened to. And he thought about a barefoot girl who had made a decision in the dark that morning that none of them would have made for strangers. He pushed the throttle. The desert opened up. They rode. The 5-hour ride to Hendricks gave Victor time to think, which was not always a gift. He thought best at speed, always had. Something about the road moving under him, the wind cutting past the physical requirement of staying present and alert, while his mind ran parallel tracks. It was the closest thing he had to meditation, which was not a word he would have used out loud to anyone. The desert transitioned slowly as they rode the flat open land, giving way to terrain that rolled and shifted, scrub brush thickening, the sky pulling toward the particular heavy gold of late afternoon. He thought about Clayton Graves. He thought about Meridian. He thought about the phrase other locations and the casual way it had been said, the way you said something when it was established, fact rather than plan, when the question was sequencing rather than weather. And underneath all of that persistent and specific, he thought about Lily Marsh. Not in a way he would have described to anyone, not yet, but the image of her standing in the middle of the highway kept returning to him with a clarity that was unusual. Most things he witnessed in the course of a day, even significant things, he processed and filed and moved past. His mind was efficient that way. But this kept surfacing, the extended arms, the palms out, the shaking that she had overridden with pure decision. He had known maybe 4 people in his life who he would describe as genuinely brave. Not reckless, not numb, not trained into a different relationship with danger. Actually, brave, aware of the cost, clear about the risk, and moving forward anyway. He was beginning to think she was one of them. They pulled into Hendricks's property as the sun was finishing its descent, 42 bikes coming off the highway onto a private road that most people didn't know existed. Wendell Hendricks was 71 years old, a former judge with the kind of history that made him trusted by people who didn't trust each other, a rare position that he maintained through a combination of genuine integrity and an absolute absence of fear. He had been retired for 9 years. He had never retired from knowing things. His property was large enough that 42 motorcycles didn't crowd it. He was standing on his porch when they arrived, arms crossed, face arranged in the expression of a man who had been expecting this visit approximately 8 hours after he'd first heard about what had happened on that highway. Victor didn't ask how he knew. Wendell always knew. That was the whole point of Wendell. Victor killed his engine and swung off his bike. The 2 men looked at each other across the distance of the porch steps. Graves, Wendell said, no preamble. Meridian, Victor said back. Wendell's expression shifted slightly, just slightly. Come inside, he said. All of you. I've got food, and I've got a full picture that you're going to want to sit down for. The men moved toward the house. Lily had climbed off Colt's bike with the slightly stiff, careful movement of someone who had just spent 5 hours gripping a motorcycle for the first time. She had kept herself together for the whole ride. He'd checked on her twice through mirrors, and both times she was upright, alert, eyes moving. She was rubbing her left hand now, working out the tension in her grip. She was looking at the house. Then she was looking at the men moving toward it, and then she was looking at the ground, and Victor recognized the calculation she was running, whether she was supposed to go in, whether there was an assumption about that, whether she should wait outside. He turned back toward her. Lily. She looked up. He tilted his head toward the house. She came. Wendell's house was the kind of space that accumulated significance over decades, books and documents, and the residue of a life spent paying serious attention to serious things. Wendell moved through it with the efficiency of a man who knew exactly where everything was leading them through to a large rear room that had clearly been in use already tonight. A long table, papers, a laptop, 3 phones. 42 men filled the room, and the adjacent spaces spreading naturally, finding walls and surfaces to lean against. Dex stayed close to Victor. Rook positioned himself near the door, which was habit. Lily stayed near the back of the room near Colt. Colt was watching Wendell with the focused attention he brought to things he didn't yet understand but was determined to. Wendell sat down at the head of the table and looked at Victor. Sit down, Bear. Victor sat. The girl, Wendell said, looking past Victor toward the back of the room. Victor turned. Lily met Wendell's gaze without flinching. Come here, Wendell said. Not unkindly, not particularly gently either, just directly in the way of a man who had spent 40 years in courtrooms. Lily walked forward. Wendell looked at her for a long moment with the specific assessment of someone who had spent a lifetime reading people in high-stakes situations. You heard the gray-haired man give instructions, he said. Lily nodded. Yes. You remember his exact words? Yes. Tell me. She did. The same account she had given Victor on the highway, delivered with the same precision, without embellishment and without omission. Wendell listened with his eyes on her face and his hands flat on the table, and he did not interrupt once. When she finished, Wendell was quiet for a moment. "The M inside a circle on his jacket," he said. "Yes." Wendell looked at Victor. Something passed between them that was the communication of two men who had known each other long enough that the exchange of significant information didn't require a lot of words. "That's not Meridian Group," Wendell said. The room went very still. Victor leaned forward slightly. "Explain," he said. "Meridian Group is real," Wendell said, "and they're connected to this. But that logo M inside a circle, that's Meridian's parent organization. An entity that Meridian is a subsidiary of. They go by a name internally that almost nobody on the outside has heard." He paused. "Compass." Nobody spoke. "Compass has been operating in this region for approximately 4 years," Wendell continued. "They are not a contractor in the traditional sense. They are closer to an investment, a private intelligence and enforcement infrastructure with a client portfolio that includes corporate interests, political interests, and individuals with the resources to buy both." He looked at Victor steadily. "Clayton Graves is not a client. Clayton Graves is a vehicle. Someone above Graves, someone who has a financial stake in this region that is threatened by the way your club operates. Use Graves' personal grudge as operational cover. Graves thinks he's running a revenge play. He's actually providing plausible deniability for something considerably larger." Victor felt the temperature of the room change around him. Donnie Reyes spoke from across the room. "What interest? What's the financial stake?" Wendell looked at him. "The highway corridor you use regularly for logistics, the land adjacent to 3 of your properties in this region, and a legal operation that was filed 8 months ago quietly to reclassify the zoning on those land parcels." He paused. "If your organization is eliminated or sufficiently disrupted, the legal challenge to that zoning becomes significantly easier. You have been filing opposition to that reclassification for 2 years without fully knowing what was behind the push." The silence in the room was absolute. Victor ran the numbers in his head. The land disputes, the zoning fights, the legal boss, and the endless bureaucratic delay that had consumed more of his energy than any physical confrontation in recent memory. He had dealt with them as property disputes, as nuisance, as the cost of operating in a region where there were always interests that wanted the same land you were standing on. He had not understood what was behind it. He understood now. "Other locations," Victor said. Wendell looked at him. The man on the hillside mentioned other locations. To the younger one, "After this, are we going to the other locations?" Wendell's jaw tightened slightly. Yes, this was the largest single operation. But there are 3 other planned actions. Different targets, different methods. Today was the one with the highest operational complexity because of the numbers involved. He looked around the room at 42 men. They wanted the leadership structure gone, the full group. With the leadership structure eliminated, the remainder of the organization would fracture. That's the model. "When are the other operations planned?" Dex asked. "I don't have the timing on all 3, Wendell said. "What I have," he picked up a paper from the table. "One of them is within the next 72 hours. The room shifted again, bodies changing weight, the subtle physical communication of people processing urgency. "Who are the other targets?" Victor asked. 2 are organizational, 1 is personal. Wendell set the paper down and looked at Victor directly. "The personal target is your daughter." Everything stopped. Victor didn't move, He did not breathe for 1 full second. He did not change his expression in any way that someone watching from outside could have measured. But inside, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, something happened that was unlike anything he had felt in the course of this already extraordinary day. His daughter was 22. She lived in Phoenix. She ran a small repair business with 2 of her friends, and she and Victor talked on the phone every Sunday without fail. And she had his jaw and her mother's laugh, and she did not know what he did or what he was or what kind of people were capable of deciding that she was an acceptable lever to use against him. "When," he said, his voice was flat and perfectly level and contained absolutely nothing. "Timing uncertain, within the 72-hour window." Victor looked at Dex. Dex was already on his phone. "She's going to need to move," Victor said. "Moving her now," Dex said. Victor stood up. The room watched him. He stood with his hands on the table and looked at Wendell. What do you have on Compass Leadership? Actual names, actual faces. Working on it. I have 3 partial identifications and a 4th. I'm moving on through a contact who will be back to me tonight. I need the command structure, not the contractors, not Graves, the people who made the decision. I know what you need, Wendell said. I've been working on this since Rook's call came through this afternoon. What I'm telling you is that tonight is about your daughter and about the other 3 targets. The command structure is the work of days, not hours. If you go after Compass before you know exactly who you're going after, you'll surface your position and they'll accelerate the other operations. Victor looked at him. Every instinct he had was pointed in one direction toward Phoenix, toward his daughter, toward the specific and ancient imperative that preceded every other obligation in his life by a distance that couldn't be measured. He felt the pull of it the way you felt gravity. It wasn't a feeling, it was a physical truth. He sat back down. Because Wendell was right, and being right mattered more than almost anything. Dex was across the room now, speaking quietly and with absolute authority into his phone, and Victor didn't track the specific words because he knew what Dex was doing and he trusted it, and tracking it would not make it happen faster. He looked at the table. Lily was standing 6 feet away. She was the only person in the room looking at him rather than at Wendell or at Dex or at each other. She was looking at his face with the same careful attention she brought to everything, and he met her eyes briefly, and she didn't look away. He looked back at the table. The 3 other organizational targets, he said to Wendell. Do any of them know their targets? No. Then we start there. We warn them tonight. That surfaces your position, Wendell said. If Compass knows the highway operation failed and the targets are being warned, they'll know the information breach came from someone who was on that hillside this morning. Victor looked at him. Or from someone who was under the hillside. The room shifted again. Lily went very still. Victor did not look at her. If they have any surveillance at all on that area, they know someone was there. They may already be moving to identify who. Possible, Wendell said. Which is why she's been in the same group as 42 motorcycles since this morning, Victor said, and now he did look at Lily, which is why that stays the same for the foreseeable future. Lily looked at him for a moment. Her voice when she spoke was careful and quiet. You're saying I'm already identified. I'm saying it's possible. How possible? Victor thought about it honestly, which she had earned. They had surveillance on the highway approach, standard operational practice for an ambush. Whether that surveillance captured the hillside above the overhang depends on how thorough they were. He paused. Thorough is how Wendell describes them. Wendell confirmed it with a single nod. Lily absorbed that. Victor watched her process it, not with panic, not with the kind of visible fear that would have been completely reasonable, but with the steady recalibration of someone adjusting a calculation based on new variables. So what I did this morning didn't just save your group, she said slowly. It potentially made me a target. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. The word dropped into the silence unexpectedly, and 3 or 4 people in the room turned to look at her. If they're watching me, they're looking in the wrong direction, she said. They're not watching whatever you're actually going to do next. Victor stared at her. Dex across the room had paused his phone call to look at her. Rook near the door made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. She's not wrong, Dex said. Victor looked at Lily for a long moment. I'm not volunteering to be a target on purpose, she said. I'm saying that if I already am one, there's a way to use it. You know things they don't know you know. I'm in a position they're watching. Those are 2 separate advantages. She paused. I'm just saying you should think about it. Victor looked at her with an expression that he was aware was difficult to read because he was working hard to keep it that way. Because what he was actually really experiencing in that moment was something that didn't have a comfortable category, a combination of professional respect, something protective, and a very specific and somewhat disconcerting recognition. This girl thought tactically, not because she'd been trained to, because she had spent 2 years in conditions that required it, and she had the natural disposition for it that most people didn't develop even with training. I'll think about it, he said. Wendell cut back in. There's something else. Something I need you to hear before we go any further with the tactical picture. He looked at Victor. The fourth partial identification I mentioned. The person I'm still working to confirm. He paused. Bear the information that Compass had about your group, the number of riders, the route, the timing that information came from inside. The room went so quiet that the only sound was the distant evening wind against the windows. Victor looked at Wendell. Inside, he said, one word. Someone in or adjacent to your organization passed operational details to Compass, not recently. This has been running for months. The zoning information, the logistical patterns the rider count for today, those don't come from external observation. They come from proximity. Victor looked at the room. 41 men looked back at him. He had known these people for years. He had ridden with them, fought beside them, buried some of their friends, and been to weddings and christenings and the particular hard gatherings that happen when someone is gone. He knew their families. He knew their histories. He knew the specific weight of their loyalty because he had tested it and it had held every single time. He looked at them and he thought one of you. He kept his face absolutely even. How confident are you, he asked Wendell. 75% on the pattern, still working the identity. When will you have it? Tonight, tomorrow morning latest. Victor nodded. He did not look at his men again. He looked at the table. Okay, he said. Here's what happens right now. Dex runs the relocation of my daughter. That is the first priority. He said it without heat, without the tremor that was actually present somewhere beneath the surface. Rook, you take 2 men and run communication with the 3 other targets. We warn them tonight carefully through channels that don't point back to us or to this location. Wendell, you work the 4th identification until you have it. He paused. Everyone else stays on this property tonight. Nobody goes anywhere. Nobody communicates outside this property on any personal device. He looked up at the room. We have a breach. Until we know where it is, we operate like everything we say can be heard. Act normal, stay sharp, and trust nobody you haven't stood next to today. He let that land. Are we clear? 41 voices gave him something that ranged from yes to a short, emphatic sound, but they were all the same word. The room began to move, men breaking off into the tasks that had been assigned or finding the spaces they would occupy for the night. Victor sat for one more moment at the table. He thought someone in that room. He thought about his daughter, 22 years old in Phoenix, who was right now being reached by Dex's call and being told she needed to move immediately and not ask questions until later. She knew how to respond to that. He had made sure of it. He had hated making sure of it. He had done it anyway because the world was the world, and hoping otherwise didn't protect people you loved. He stood up. Lily was still nearby. She had not moved to find a corner or a chair. She had stayed at the edge of his awareness, like she had decided that was the most useful place to be, and she was probably right about that too. Your daughter, she said low. Yes. Is she safe right now? Dex is making her safe right now. Lily nodded. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. When my grandmother died, she said, I found out through a text from a cousin. Just a text, no call, no. I was sitting outside a bus station in Flagstaff and my phone screen lit up and it said, Grandma passed this morning. That's all. She stopped. I sat on the sidewalk for about an hour. People walked around me. I was just sitting there and nobody stopped. Victor looked at her. I just wanted you to know that I understand what it's like to hear something about someone you love and not be able to get to them, she said, and to have to hold it together anyway. She looked at him directly. You're holding it together. I can see how hard you're working at it. I just wanted to say that I see it. Victor was quiet for a long moment. He was not a man who was told often that he was seen. He was looked at constantly, assessed, judged, followed, feared, occasionally respected. But seen was different. Seen meant the inside thing, not the surface. Thank you, he said. He meant it. He walked to the window and stood there for a moment looking out at the dark, where 42 motorcycles were parked in the quiet, and he thought about the distance between Phoenix and here, and he thought about the 4th identification, and he thought about who in that room had made a call they shouldn't have made. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Dex's number. He answered it before the second vibration. Talk to me. She's moving, Dex said. She's got Sarah and Jake with her. They're pulling out right now. She's scared, but she's moving. She asked me to tell you. A brief pause. She asked me to tell you she knows you didn't call because you're in the middle of it, and she gets it, and she loves you, and she'll be okay. Victor closed his eyes, just for a second. Good, he said. Stay on her until she's at the secondary location and confirmed inside. On it, Dex said. He hung up. He stood at the window, behind him, Lily's voice, not directed at him, directed at Colt, who had ended up near her again in the natural rearrangement of the room. How are you doing? She was asking him. Colt made a sound. Honestly, my brain's going about 100 miles an hour. I know that feeling. The thing with Bear's daughter, he stopped. That's a different thing from the highway. That's targeting family. Yes, Lily said, they're willing to go after family. People who decide they want something badly enough are willing to go after anything, Lily said. That's something I learned. The only thing that slows them down is when the cost gets higher than what they're willing to pay. How do you make the cost higher? You make sure they understand what they're dealing with, she said. Most people who go after someone, they have a picture in their head of who that someone is, a version of them that's smaller than the reality. You make them confront the real version. Colt was quiet for a moment. Is that what you did this morning on the highway? Lily was quiet. You made them confront the real version of 42 people, he asked. I made them miss, she said simply. Victor turned from the window. The room had settled into the various tasks of a group of people digging in for a long night. Rook was in the corner making his careful calls. Dex was back moving between conversations, managing 3 things simultaneously. Wendell was at his table with his laptop and his papers, moving through the work of identity confirmation with the steady focus of a man who had spent his career finding what people tried to hide. And Lily Marsh was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, shoes off the wrapped feet extended in front of her, talking to Colt in a low voice about what it meant to make someone confront what they were actually dealing with. Victor looked at her. He thought about Clayton Graves, somewhere comfortable waiting for confirmation of completion. He thought about the entity called Compass and the person at the top of it who had decided that an old man's grudge was a convenient vehicle for clearing a land dispute. He thought about the surgical, patient, invisible way that power sometimes chose to operate, not with noise, not with declaration, but with quiet strings and purchased professionals and the kind of plausible deniability that kept hands clean while other people's hands did the work. He thought about a girl under a desert overhang who had heard those hands at work, and he thought about what she had just said to Colt. You make them confront the real version. He had a feeling that before this was finished, that was exactly what was going to happen. And he had a feeling, not yet fully formed, not yet ready to be said out loud, that Lily Marsh was going to be part of how it happened. Not as a tool, not as a vehicle the way Graves had been used, as something else. As someone who had walked out of the desert with nothing except what she'd survived and had turned that nothing into the thing that changed everything. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Wendell's signal information incoming through a different channel. He crossed the room and held out his hand to Wendell, who passed him a single piece of paper. A name. One name. The 4th identification. Victor looked at it. He read it twice. He set the paper down on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when you need your hands to be completely still. Then he looked up at the room at 41 men and one 19-year-old girl, and he thought about the name on that paper and what it meant and what it was going to require. He looked at Dex. Dex crossed to him and looked at the paper. The road captain said nothing for a count of 3. Then he said very quietly, "That's not possible." Wendell says 75%, Victor said. "That's too high," Dex said. His voice was strange. "That's way too high." "I know." "Bertunian, I know," Victor said again. He picked the paper back up. He looked at the name one more time. He memorized it, which was unnecessary because he already knew it and had known it for years, known it. The way you knew the names of the people who made up the texture of your life, the background constants, the assumed and the trusted, and the so thoroughly woven in that their absence would change the shape of everything. He set the paper face down on the table. He looked out at the room. The work continued. Rook made his calls. Dex managed the logistics. The men talked and waited and prepared for a night that was going to be long. And Victor sat with the name on the paper and felt the full weight of what it meant to discover that the map you had been living by had a road on it that you had never seen going somewhere you had never meant to go, marked out by someone who knew every hill and curve because they had been riding with you the whole time. The name was Eddie Garza. Victor had known Eddie for 11 years. 11 years of riding side by side, of shared meals and shared risks, of the specific intimacy that came from being the kind of people who trusted each other with their lives. Because trusting each other with their lives was not a figure of speech. It was the literal operational condition of the work they did together. Eddie had been at Victor's right hand through 3 of the worst situations the club had ever navigated. He had been one of the men who sat in the hospital waiting room the night Victor's daughter had her appendix out 4 years ago and had stayed until 6 in the morning, even though there was nothing to do except be there. Victor sat with the paper face down on the table and did not look at Eddie Garza, who was across the room leaning against the far wall talking to Marcus Webb about something that looked from the outside like absolutely nothing of consequence. He looked ordinary. He looked exactly like himself. He looked like a man who had no idea what was on that piece of paper. Victor was very good at reading people. He had been doing it his entire adult life, and he had developed a precision for it that went beyond instinct into something closer to craft. And looking at Eddie right now, he could not read a single thing that was wrong. The posture was right. The conversation was natural. The eyes moved the way Eddie's eyes always moved, quick, a little watchful. The alertness of a man who had been in enough situations to stay permanently engaged with his surroundings. Either Wendell was wrong, or Eddie Garza was the best actor Victor had ever encountered. Dex appeared at his elbow, moving quietly, standing at the angle that blocked their conversation from being read across the room. "What do you want to do?" Dex asked. "Nothing yet," Victor said. "We can't leave it." "I know we can't leave it. I said not yet." He kept his voice at a register that required Dex to lean in slightly. 75%, that's Wendell's number. 25% says we're looking at the wrong man. And if we act on that 25 and we're wrong, then we've done something that can't be undone to a man who doesn't deserve it, Victor said. So we wait. Dex was quiet for a moment. "How long?" "Until I know." "Bear." "Dex?" Victor looked at him directly. "How long have you known me?" Dex looked back. 12 years. "Have I ever moved before I was sure?" A pause. "No." "Then let me work." Dex straightened and moved away. Victor stood up from the table. He crossed the room with the unhurried movement of a man who was simply changing position, finding the room easier on his feet than a chair. He stopped near Rook, asked a low question about the status of the warning calls to the other targets. Got a brief answer, 2 of 3 confirmed, 1 still working, and kept moving. He moved until he was close enough to Eddie to be natural. 3 feet, the conversational distance of men who knew each other well. Eddie looked at him and grinned in. "Marcus thinks I'm wrong about the Nevada situation in 19. "You were wrong about the Nevada situation in 19, Victor said. "See," Marcus said to Eddie. Eddie laughed. 2 against 1, fine. He shook his head. "What's the status on Wendell's identifications? We getting somewhere?" Victor looked at him. "Working on it." "The compass thing." Eddie's expression shifted to something more serious. "That's not a small problem. That's the kind of problem that has a long tail." "Yes," Victor said. "You know what I keep thinking," Eddie said. He looked at his hands for a moment. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if that girl hadn't stepped out. If she'd done the rational thing and stayed under her rock and let us ride through." He shook his head. "We'd be gone. All of us. And Compass would have moved on to the next item on their list and nobody would have connected it." "No," Victor agreed. "Nobody would have." "Funny thing, Luck," Eddie said. "Is that what it was?" Eddie looked at him. "What would you call it?" Victor held his gaze for exactly the right amount of time. "Courage," he said. "I'd call it courage." He paused. "Get some food, Eddie. It's going to be a long night." He walked away. He walked directly to Wendell's table and sat down and leaned forward. "So you Sahar. I need to know what you have," he said. "Not the conclusion, the evidence. Walk me through it piece by piece." Wendell looked at him for a moment. He understood what Victor was asking and why. He turned his laptop so that Victor could see the screen, and he began to walk him through it. It took 40 minutes. At the end of those 40 minutes, Victor sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. He was no longer sitting with 75%. He was sitting with something considerably higher than that, and it felt like a physical weight, like the specific heaviness of a thing you have been carrying for a long time without knowing you were carrying it. The pattern in the data was not ambiguous. Phone records that placed specific communications at specific times that aligned precisely with operational windows. Financial movements that were small enough to be dismissible individually and undeniable in aggregate. Two contacts that ran through a chain that ended after 4 degrees of separation at an entity that Wendell had now confirmed was a Compass subsidiary. 11 years. Victor thought about the Nevada situation in 2019 that he and Marcus had just told Eddie he was wrong about. He thought about what he now understood about that situation. A supply line disruption that had cost them 3 months of revenue and 2 key relationships which they had always attributed to bad timing in one particularly hostile local jurisdiction. He thought about it through the lens of what he was looking at on Wendell's screen. It wasn't bad timing, it was Eddie. Victor closed his eyes, one breath. Then he opened them and he was done with the internal part of it. He was done processing. He had the truth, and the truth required action, and action was something he knew how to do. How do you want to handle this? Wendell asked. Quietly, Victor said. And right. He stood up. He looked across the room at Eddie Garza, who was eating a sandwich and listening to Colt say something with the easy attention of a man at the end of an ordinary hard day. And he thought 11 years. He thought about all the things he had trusted Eddie with, all the conversations, all the information that had flowed naturally in the way that information flows between brothers, without gates, without guards, because you were supposed to be safe. He thought about the 41 men in this room who were alive right now because of a barefoot girl in a desert overhang, and he thought about how close that had been, and he made himself hold that picture clearly so that what he was about to do would not be muddied by 11 years of memory. He walked to Dex. You were right, he said. We can't leave it. Dex looked upon him. You're sure? 90% sure, Victor said. And in this situation, that's enough. Dex said nothing for a second. He looked across the room. He looked back at Victor. He gave a single short nod. How about? He asked. I need him separated from the GRU, Victor said. Naturally, nothing that signals to him that anything is wrong. If he's been doing this as long as the data suggests he's been managing his own tells for years. One wrong signal, and he starts making calls. Dex thought for a moment. There's a secure room off the back of Wendell's study. I'll tell him Wendell wants to run through some technical communication questions with a smaller group. Makes sense. Non-threatening. Take Marcus, Victor said, and Rook. Not more, Mo. 4 in a room is enough, Victor said. More starts to feel like something. Dex moved. Victor watched him cross the room. Watched the natural ease of his road, Captain's body language, the way Dex had the ability to look like he was doing nothing of particular consequence, while doing something of extreme consequence. It was one of the reasons Victor had made him road captain in the first place. He watched Dex speak to Marcus. He watched Rook receive the nod from across the room and move toward the back of the house without breaking stride. He watched Dex say something to Eddie. Eddie nodded and pushed himself off the wall and followed. Victor waited 90 seconds. Then he followed. The back room was smaller, one overhead light. 4 chairs pulled into a rough square, which was how Wendell conducted the conversations he considered serious. Victor came in last and closed the door. Eddie looked at the room. He looked at the 4 faces. And something happened in his expression, something that confirmed for Victor the last 10%. It was small. It was fast. It was the specific micro-expression of a person who has just understood that they are in a situation they did not expect, running a rapid calculation about what they know and don't know, and what the right play is from here. A practiced person could control it in under a second. Eddie controlled it in under a second, but Victor had been watching for it. What's this? Eddie asked. His voice was exactly right, the mildly curious tone of a man with nothing to hide. Sit down, Eddie, Victor said. Eddie looked at him for a beat. Then he sat. Victor sat across from him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Eddie was running his calculation behind his eyes. Victor could see the work of it, the assessment of what was known, what was suspected, what the available plays were from a seated position in a closed room with Rook near the door. Victor had seen men run calculations like that before. He had sat across the table from people who were very good at it. Most people, when they realized the calculation was failing, started with denial. Strong, immediate, emotional denial that was designed to use the social weight of the relationship, the history, the affection, the accumulated trust as a defense. He was ready for that. What he was not ready for was what Eddie actually did. Eddie Garza put his hands flat on his knees, looked at Victor and said, How much do you know? The room went still. Marcus made a sound. Rook near the door didn't move. Dex was very quiet. Victor looked at Eddie for a long moment. Enough, he said. Eddie nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. He looked at the ceiling. He took one long breath through his nose and let it out. And what came out with it, Victor realized, was not calculation anymore. What came out was something closer to exhaustion. The bone-deep exhaustion of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has been waiting on some level for the moment when he no longer had to. How long? Victor asked. Eddie met his eyes. 3 years. Since the Graves situation. Before that, the Graves situation was they approached me before that, 18 months before. He paused. They had information on me that I couldn't let surface, family information, my brother's situation. He stopped. Victor knew about Eddie's brother, a federal case from 7 years ago, a situation that had been managed, resolved, buried, the kind of thing that stayed buried unless someone with the right tools chose to dig it up. They found it, Victor said. They didn't just find it, they activated it, dropped it in front of me, and told me what it would mean if it resurfaced. Eddie's voice was flat. My brother has kids, 3 kids, a wife. He's been clean for 6 years. If that case reopens, he stopped. So you said yes, Victor said. I said yes, Eddie confirmed. And then you spent 3 years feeding them information about this group. Yes. And the Nevada situation in 2019. A pause. Yes. The supply line disruption. Yes. So. The legal challenge to the zoning. I didn't know about the zoning until later. When I understood what they were using me for, I didn't know the full picture or at the start. They gave me one thing at a time. Small things at first, routes, timing, nothing that felt like it would. He stopped himself. That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse. No, Victor said. It's not. The silence in the room had a texture to it. Not quite anger that would come probably for some of the men later. Right now, it was something more complex. The specific grief of betrayal, which was different from the grief of loss, because it required the revision of everything you thought you knew about a period of your life that you had considered settled. Today, Victor said, the 42 number, the route, the timing. Yes, Eddie said, that was you. Yes. Victor looked at him for a long time. Did you know what they were going to do with it? Eddie looked back at him. His jaw worked slightly. I knew it was an ambush, he said. I didn't know the scale. He stopped. I didn't know it was going to be a massacre. I thought it was going to be a warning. A physical confrontation. I didn't know about the cable on the road. I didn't know about 10 shooters. Would that have changed what you did? It was the hardest question in the room, and Victor asked it straight, the way he asked things that needed straight answers. Eddie was quiet for a long time. I want to say yes, he said finally. I want to say, of course, obviously yes, I would never have. He stopped. But I've been lying to myself for 3 years, and I'm tired of it. The honest answer is, I don't know. I don't know if it would have changed it, because by the time today came around, I was so deep in it that I couldn't see any way out that didn't destroy everything. He looked at Victor. That's the truth. I don't know. Victor sat with that. He sat with the fact that the honest answer was, I don't know. And the fact that Eddie had given him the honest answer instead of the comfortable one. He didn't know what to do with that yet. It didn't undo anything. It didn't change the weight of what sat on that side of the scale, but it was real, and real was all Victor had ever been able to work with. Your brother, Victor said, is that information still active? Are they still holding it? Eddie looked up. He hadn't expected that question. I assume so. He paused. That's what they do. They keep the leverage active. Then we remove it, Victor said. Eddie stared at him. How? That's not your problem right now, Victor said. That's mine. He looked at Dex briefly. Dex nodded once, which meant he was already thinking about what that required and who he knew who could work that specific problem. What I need from you right now is everything. Everything you gave them. Every communication. Every contact name you have. Every location, every method, every piece of information that moved between you and Compass in 3 years. Eddie was staring at him. You want me to help you, he said. I need what you know, Victor said. Whether you want to call that helping is your choice. After what Eddie, Victor's voice was quiet and very clear. We're not doing the part where you tell me what you did and I tell you what it means for you in this room right now. That conversation is going to happen, but it's not this conversation. This conversation is about 42 men who are alive because a teenage girl stood in a road, and about 3 other targets who don't know their targets, and about a command structure that is still operating and still dangerous. He paused. That's what this conversation is about. So I need to know everything you know, and then we'll deal with the rest. Eddie looked at him for a long moment. Then he started talking. He talked for 2 hours. What came out in those 2 hours was the architecture of 3 years of information transfer, specific detailed operational information that filled in the picture Wendell had been building from the outside with the texture that only an inside source could provide. Contact names, communication methods, meeting locations. The specific people within Compass's structure who had handled Eddie directly and the 2 levels above them that Eddie had glimpsed but never directly encountered. The financial mechanism. The threat management system they used to maintain leverage on sources. And the name at the top of Compass was a man named Richard Carver. Not a name that meant anything in the world most people inhabited, but in the world of private capital and regulatory navigation and the kind of quiet land acquisition that made fortunes without anyone noticing until it was too late. Richard Carver was someone that Wendell, when Victor passed him the name through the door, recognized immediately. Carver, Wendell said. You know him, Victor said. I know of him. He has a long history of exactly this kind of operation, purchasing contested land through legal maneuvers backed by private enforcement. He's been investigated twice. Nothing stuck. Wendell looked at the name. If we can connect him to today's operation in a way that creates a documented record. We can, Victor said. Eddie's going to help us build it. Wendell looked at him over the paper. You trust him to do that? Victor thought about the 2 hours of information. He thought about the exhaustion in Eddie's voice. He thought about the question he had asked, would it have changed things, and the honest answer that came back. No, he said, but I trust that he's out of options and smart enough to know it. That's enough to work with. He walked back into the main room. The group had settled into the long night mode that experienced people settle into, not asleep, not fully at rest, but conserving energy in the way of people who know there is more work ahead and are smart enough not to burn everything now. Low conversations, people stretched out, the particular quiet of organized waiting. Lily was awake. She was sitting near the window, knees pulled up, looking at nothing in particular with the focused inward attention of someone working through something. She looked up when Victor approached, and she read his face in the way she had been reading faces since the morning, not intrusively, not with the social assessment gaze of someone trying to gain advantage, but with the genuine attention of someone who found people important and worth understanding. It was someone you knew, she said, not a question. Victor sat down near her, not across the room, near. He had stopped managing the distance between himself and this girl sometime in the past 12 hours without quite noticing when. Yes, he said, someone you trusted. Yes, she was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, she said, and she said it the way she said things that she meant without decoration, without the social filler that turns real words into empty ones. He had reasons, Victor said, not justification, reasons. People usually do, Lily said. That's the hard part, isn't it? When you understand how someone got somewhere, it doesn't make where they ended up okay. But it makes it more complicated than you want it to be. Victor looked at her. How do you think about that complication? She considered it seriously. I think that what matters most isn't where someone ended up. It's what they do from wherever they are right now. You can't go back. You can only move forward or not move at all. She paused. Whether the person in question moves forward, that tells you more about them than the mistake does. And if the mistake costs people their lives, Lily held his gaze, then the bar for what moving forward looks like is considerably higher. Victor nodded slowly. He thought about Eddie in the back room with Wendell walking through 3 years of information, with the meticulous care of a man who understood that this was the only thing left to offer. He thought about whether that constituted moving forward. He didn't have an answer for that yet. He wasn't sure he would for a long time. Dex appeared from the direction of the study. Wendell has the Carver connection mapped, he said, and Rook's got the third warning, confirmed all 3 targets are alerted and moving. He looked at Victor. There's something else. One of the contacts Eddie gave us, one of the mid-level Compass handlers, he's local. 40 minutes from here. Victor looked at him. We have an opportunity to take him before he goes dark, Dex said. If Compass hasn't heard back from the highway team yet, this handler won't know the operation failed. We can move on him in the next 2 hours, or we lose the window entirely. Victor stood up. Who goes? He asked. You, me, Rook. Small group. Dex paused. Eddie says he can make initial contact. A call. Something that explains why there's been no word from the highway team without raising flags. Buy us more time in the window. Victor looked at Dex. You trust that? He asked. I trust that he wants to start somewhere, Dex said. And I trust that you've already thought about what happens if he runs this call wrong. Victor had. There were contingencies. There were enough of them. Set it up, he said. He turned to look for Lily and found her already on her feet reading the room. Stay here, he said. Stay with the group. If anything moves in the next 2 hours, find Wendell, she said. Find Wendell, he confirmed. She nodded. He held her gaze for a moment. In 14 hours, she had gone from a barefoot girl in the middle of a highway to the most situationally aware person in a room full of people who did this for a living. He didn't know what to do with that observation except file it in the growing archive of things about Lily Marsh that didn't fit any category he had an existing name for. Be careful, she said. Always, he said, which was not precisely true, but was the right answer. The call came from Eddie's phone. Eddie's voice. Eddie's relationship with a handler who had been managing him for 3 years and had no reason to hear anything unusual in the sound of a familiar voice. Victor stood 2 feet away and listened to Eddie make the call with the professional steadiness of a man who had been living a double life long enough that one more performance was not beyond his capacity. The handler bought it. 42 more minutes in the window. They moved. The operation that followed was compact and precise, and Victor's version of quiet meaning that nobody got hurt who didn't make the choice to make it necessary. The handler was a man named Cole Strickett, 48 years old, former private security, with the specifically blank professionalism of someone who had long ago stopped asking what the work was for and had focused entirely on performing it correctly. He was at his home location. He was not expecting visitors. He became, in a very short period of time, significantly more cooperative than he had probably planned to be when he woke up that morning. What he gave them in 90 minutes was the operational calendar for the next 30 days. All 3 remaining planned actions with timing targets and methods. The communication hierarchy above him. 2 names that were new even to Wendell, and 1 piece of information that Victor had not anticipated and that changed the shape of the next step considerably. Richard Carver was not in Nevada. Richard Carver was currently at a property 4 hours from where they were standing. Victor looked at Rook. Rook looked back. He came in to confirm the outcome personally, Rook said. He was going to be here for the confirmation of the highway operation. He's waiting for confirmation that still hasn't come, Victor said, which means he's still here. Victor stood very still for a moment. 4 hours, 42 riders. A man who had decided that the people Victor loved and the brothers he had built a life with were acceptable collateral damage in a land acquisition strategy. He thought about his daughter in a safe location, scared waiting for a Sunday call that was going to happen on the wrong day this week. He thought about 42 men on a desert highway who had driven toward a cable strung across the asphalt because they trusted the road. He thought about Eddie Garza in a back room running through 3 years of betrayal because someone had found the right lever to pull, and the way that kind of leverage worked, and the way that Compass had built a system specifically designed to find the right lever for every person they needed. He thought about Lily, standing in the dark under an overhang hearing armed men making a decision. He thought about the distance between doing the thing that kept you safe and doing the thing that was right, and how that distance could feel like the whole world until someone showed you that it was crossable. He made the call. We go tonight, he said. Dex didn't hesitate. Tonight. Rook was already calculating. 4 hours puts us there in the early morning. If Carver's still waiting for confirmation, he won't have changed location by then. He won't, Victor said. He's the kind of man who waits for his employees to bring him news. He doesn't go looking for it. They moved back toward Wendell's property. Victor's phone buzzed as they pulled back onto the main road. His daughter's number. He answered it. Hey, she said. Her voice was steady. She sounded like him in the way that certain things pass between parents and children without anyone teaching them. "Hey," he said. "Dex said I shouldn't ask questions." Dex is usually right. "Are you okay?" He drove one-handed for a moment and the night road empty ahead of him. "I'm okay," he said. "I'm going to need a day or two before I can explain everything, but I'm okay." "The people around you, are they okay?" "Yes," he said, "because of someone who made a very brave decision this morning." A pause on the line. "Who?" Victor looked at the road. He thought about Lily sitting at Wendell's window in the dark, knees pulled up, working through something, the particular focused quality of her silence that had started to feel in the 12 hours since she'd stepped into the highway, like something he would notice the absence of. "Someone new," he said. "I'll tell you about her when I see you." His daughter was quiet for a second. She said in the tone of a 22-year-old woman registering the specific weight her father had put on a single pronoun. "Drive safe," Victor said. "I'll call Sunday." "You better," she said. He hung up. He looked at the road ahead, the long, dark road that led toward a man who had decided that other people's lives were a cost of doing business. He thought about what morning was going to require and what it was going to cost and what it was going to settle. And underneath all of that steady and specific and present, he thought about someone new. He pushed the throttle and rode toward whatever came with the light. Part 5, The Girl Who Changed Everything. They rode through the dark for 4 hours with the kind of focused silence that Victor's group had learned over years of hard travel, not the silence of men who had nothing to say, but the silence of men who understood that some moments required everything that wasn't essential to be set aside until the work was done. Victor rode point. He always rode point. But somewhere in the second hour, he became aware of something different about this particular stretch of night road. Usually when he rode toward a confrontation, his mind narrowed down to the operational, the logistics, the contingencies, the variables he could control, and the ones he couldn't. The tunnel that competent people learned to enter when the work ahead required everything they had. Tonight, the tunnel kept opening up. It kept opening up into the image of Lily Marsh sitting at Wendell's window, with her knees pulled to her chest, working through something in her head in that focused inward way she had. He didn't try to push the image away. He had learned a long time ago that the things that kept surfacing during a long ride were usually the things that deserved the attention. He thought about what she had said, that what mattered wasn't where someone ended up, but what they did from wherever they were right now. He thought about Eddie in the back room, 3 years of betrayal, laid out on a table, choosing to move forward with the only thing he had left to offer. He thought about whether that was enough and found, as he had found earlier, that he didn't have the answer yet. He thought about Richard Carver 4 hours ahead, sitting in a comfortable property waiting for confirmation of 42 deaths that had not occurred, growing gradually more concerned about the silence from a highway operation that should have been long resolved. He thought about the way Compass operated, patient, methodical, and visible, until the moment it wasn't using other people's resources and other people's grudges and other people's fear as the engine for its work, keeping its own hands clean through layer after layer of separation. It was, he recognized with the cold clarity of someone who had encountered all kinds of power in his life, one of the most effective systems he had ever seen for making terrible things happen to people who didn't know they were in danger. Until a girl under a desert overhang heard the wrong conversation. They arrived at the edge of the property, in the pre-dawn gray, that specific quality of light that was neither dark nor day, and that experienced people use for exactly this kind of approach. 4 hours of riding, and the group was alert in the way that cold air and purpose combined to produce not wired, not reckless, sharpened. Victor pulled up on a dirt service road that ran adjacent to the property's eastern edge and killed his engine. Behind him, 40 engines died in sequence, the sound collapsing backward through the group until there was nothing but wind and the distant sound of birds beginning to register that morning was coming. He turned to Dex. "What's the layout?" Rook answered from 2 bikes back. He had spent the last hour on his phone building the picture from the information Strickett had provided. Main house central. Detached structure at the back, looks like a guest house, probably staff. 2 vehicles in the drive, both registered to a property management company that traces back to a Carver holding. He paused. Strickett said Carver travels with 2 personal security, no more than 3 on a routine property visit. "So 4 people, maximum 5, Dex said. "Unless he called for backup after the highway silence," Victor said. "If he called for backup," Rook said, "they'd be coming from Nevada. 6 hours minimum." We're inside that window. Victor nodded. He looked at the group. Listen, he said, and the word carried enough weight that it didn't need to be loud. Carver is the target. Information and confrontation. We're not here to create a situation that requires explaining. Later, we're here to make a very specific kind of point in a very specific kind of way to a man who has been making decisions about our lives from a safe distance. He looked at them steadily. His security is professional. Don't underestimate them. And don't give them a reason to escalate if they don't give you one first. He picked the 8 men who would go in with him, Rook, Dex, 4 others with the specific combination of composure and experience the moment required. He told the remaining 34 to hold position and maintain radio silence unless they heard from him directly. They moved. The approach was clean and quick, and the 2 security personnel outside the main house made the professional decision to stand down when they understood the arithmetic of 8 to 2. Victor had no interest in the men doing a job. He had interest in the man who had given the job to Meridian, who had given it to Compass, who had given it to Strickett, who had given the timeline to a handler, who had given the highway details to Eddie Garza. He walked through the front door of the property at 5:14 in the morning. Richard Carver was in the main room. He was 63 years old, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had spent his life in rooms where decisions were made and never in rooms where the consequences arrived. He was dressed for the early morning in the way of a man who maintained appearances even in private, and he was holding a phone that he had clearly just been staring at. And when Victor came through the door, followed by 8 men who looked like what they were, Carver went through 3 distinct expressions in approximately 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, and then very quickly the mask. The mask was good. Victor gave him that. The mask had the smoothness of a man who had practiced composure under pressure for decades, who had sat across tables from regulators and lawyers and difficult clients and had learned to present a surface so controlled it felt like confidence. Victor had sat across from better masks than Richard Carver's. He pulled a chair to the center of the room and sat down in it. He looked at Carver. "Sit down," he said. Carver looked at him for a moment. Then he sat. "You're expecting a call," Victor said. Carver said nothing. "You've been expecting it for approximately 14 hours, Victor said. "Every hour it doesn't come, you're recalibrating what could have gone wrong. You're thinking about contingencies. You're thinking about how exposed you are if the operation failed and someone traced it back through the layers to you." He paused. "You've been building your case for deniability in your head since about hour 6. Carver's expression didn't change, but his hands resting on the arms of his chair pressed slightly into the fabric. "Here's what I know," Victor said. "I know about Compass. I know about Meridian. I know about Cole Strickett, and I know what he told us last night. I know about the zoning operation and the land acquisition and the 4 planned actions, 3 of which have now been warned and neutralized." He looked at Carver steadily. "I know about Eddie Garza, and I know what Eddie gave them, and I know how they got it. I know about Graves and what Graves was promised." He paused. "And I have a documented record of all of it. Financials, communications, operational plans, personnel. A complete record." Carver was very still. "Now," Victor said, "you're going to tell me what." Carver looked at him for a long moment. The mask held. And then, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has lost the game he thought he was winning and is intelligent enough to know exactly when that happened, it cracked just slightly at the edges. "The corridor is worth $400 million in developed value over the next decade," Carver said. His voice was flat and businesslike, as if he were in a meeting room presenting a slide. "Your organization's presence in this region creates legal challenges to the zoning reclassification that have cost my consortium 18 months of delay. The land attorney said it would take years to resolve through conventional channels." "So you went to unconventional ones," Victor said. "I went to people who solve problems efficiently." Victor looked at him. He thought about 42 men on a highway. He thought about a cable strung across asphalt at the height of a front wheel. He thought about the word efficiently. "People were going to die," Victor said. 42 of them. That was your efficient solution. "The people who ran the operation made their own choices about methodology," Carver said. "I provided a brief. The execution—" "Don't," Victor said. His voice did not raise. It did not need to. The single word landed with enough weight that Carver stopped speaking. "Don't finish that sentence." Not in front of me. Not today. Carver closed his mouth. You paid for a massacre, Victor said. The methodology is the brief. There is no separation. He paused. But here's the thing I actually came here to tell you, Richard. I didn't come here because I wanted to hear you explain yourself. I came here because I needed you to understand something very clearly, and I needed to see your face when you understood it. Carver waited. The documented record I described, Victor said, it exists, it's complete, and it is currently in the hands of 3 separate people who have instructions about what to do with it if they don't hear from me at specific intervals. He let that sit. What happens next is your choice, not mine. You can attempt to use the remaining resources of Compass to address that problem, in which case the instructions are triggered and you spend the rest of your life in a federal courtroom. Or you can walk away. From the zoning, from the land acquisition, from all of it. You dissolve your interest in this corridor and you do not replace it with another strategy, and the record stays where it is. Carver stared at him. That's it, he said. That's the play. That's the play, Victor said. You're not going to... Carver stopped. Going to what? Victor asked. Carver looked at him. Something moved in his eyes that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it, the specific unease of a man who has operated his whole life by predicting other people's behavior and is encountering someone who is not behaving as predicted. You could put this in front of law enforcement right now, Carver said slowly. You have enough. Why wouldn't you? Victor looked at him. Because what I actually want, Victor said, is for this to be over. Not managed, not litigated for 8 years while Compass restructures under a different name. Over, he paused. And because the person who saved 42 lives yesterday is a 19-year-old girl who's been sleeping under rocks in the desert for 2 years, and I have considerably better things to do with my time and energy than spend the next decade in a courtroom. He stood up. So, your choice. You have 24 hours to communicate it through Strickett, who will be expecting your call. He walked to the door. Callahan, Carver said. Victor stopped. He did not turn around. Who was she? Carver asked. The one who saw the operation. Victor stood still for a moment. Someone you never saw coming, he said. He walked out. He was on his bike and they were moving before the sun fully cleared the horizon. 42 engines reassembled and pointed toward home, the long road opening up with the particular quality of early morning that belonged to people who were still alive to see it. Victor didn't speak for the first 30 minutes. He rode. He thought about the look on Carver's face when he understood that the play was not punishment, but cessation. He thought about whether Carver would take the exit or whether his arrogance would override his intelligence. And he found that he felt almost nothing about either possibility. The contingencies were in place. The documentation was real. The people holding it were reliable. Whatever Carver chose, the outcome was manageable. He thought about Eddie. That was considerably less settled. Eddie had spent the night at Wendell's property under the quiet supervision of 2 men who were not his guards, but were also not his guards. When Victor rode back into the property at mid-morning, Eddie was sitting on the porch, coffee in both hands, looking at the middle distance, with an expression that Victor recognized, the specific look of a man who has stopped pretending and doesn't yet know what comes next. Victor sat down next to him. They sat in silence for a while. The morning was already warming the desert, doing what it did, reclaiming whatever coolness the night had allowed. Carver, Eddie asked finally. He'll walk away, Victor said. He's too smart to do anything else. Eddie nodded. Your brother's situation, Victor said. Dex has 2 people working it. The federal file has irregularities, procedural ones from the original investigation. It should have been flagged years ago. If the right people look at it, the case doesn't survive review. He paused. It'll take time, but it'll hold. Eddie looked at him, his jaw worked. Why would you? He stopped. Because holding leverage over people is how Compass operates, Victor said. And I'm not Compass. He paused. And because your brother did not make the choice you made. He made his own years ago and he's been paying for it and living right since. He doesn't carry what you did. Eddie was quiet for a long time. I don't know how to... He stopped again. You don't have to know right now, Victor said. Right now, you just have to understand what comes next. You're done with the club. That's not negotiable and you know it. But how you go, that's something that can be handled with some dignity if you let it. He looked at Eddie. You gave us everything last night. That counts. Does it? It counts for your brother's kids, Victor said. It counts for the 3 targets who were warned. It counts for whatever the documentation does to compass over time. He paused. Whether it counts for you personally is a question you're going to be answering for a long time. I can't answer it for you. Eddie nodded. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the road. 11 years, he said. Yes, Victor said. I knew you longer than I've known almost anyone. I know. And Eddie, Victor said, I know. They sat in silence for another few minutes. Then Victor stood up and went inside to find Lily. She was in the kitchen with Wendell of all people, and they were having a conversation that appeared from the doorway to be entirely serious. Wendell was talking, and Lily was listening with that full-body attention of hers, the kind that made people feel that what they were saying was the most important thing being said anywhere in the world right now. Wendell looked up when Victor came in. She has a good mind, Wendell said. Just like that. Not as a compliment directed at Lily, but as an observation directed at Victor, the way Wendell delivered judgments as established facts that didn't require the listener's agreement. Lily looked at Victor. How did it go? She asked. It went, he said. She read his face. Carver. He'll walk. She absorbed that. He could see her checking it against her own assessment of how things should have gone, and he could see the moment she arrived at the same conclusion he had, that walking away was the efficient outcome that an 8-year legal battle served. No one well that the exit Carver had been given was the kind that left everything properly settled in a way that courtrooms often didn't. And Eddie, she asked. He looked at her. She said it carefully, like she understood she was asking about something that was still raw. Eddie's leaving the club, Victor said. We're going to handle his situation as cleanly as it can be handled given everything. He paused. His brother's kids aren't going to pay for what he did. That matters. Lily nodded slowly. Wendell stood up from the table. He was the kind of man who recognized when a room needed fewer people in it, and he moved toward the door with the purposeful air of a man who had somewhere to be, which may or may not have been true, but was certainly convenient. Victor sat down at the table across from Lily. She was looking at him with the straightforward attention that he had been on the receiving end of for the past 18 hours, and he had come to understand that it didn't mean what it looked like from the outside. It wasn't challenge, wasn't demand. It was just her version of being fully present in a conversation, and it was unusual enough that it still caught him slightly off guard each time. What happens now? She asked. For the club, we go home, he said. We go home and we do the work of understanding what 3 years of compromised information means for our operations, and we rebuild what needs to be rebuilt, and we keep going. That's what you do. And for you personally, he looked at her. Same answer. She nodded. And for me, she asked. The question was quiet. It was not asked with expectation or with fear. It was asked with the genuine open uncertainty of a person who has been operating without a future for long enough that the concept of a future requires asking about. Victor looked at her for a long moment. He had been thinking about this since the ride back. He had been thinking about what the right thing to say was, and he had gone through several versions of it in his head, and what he kept arriving back at was that with Lily, the right thing was always the direct thing because that was what she was built for and what she had earned. You saved 42 lives, he said, not as a transaction, not because you wanted something in return. You saved them because it was right and because you had the courage to do what was right when nobody was watching and there was nothing in it for you. He paused. That kind of person doesn't sleep under overhangs and eat crackers from trash cans. Not while I'm in a position to do something about it. Lily looked at him steadily. What does that mean specifically? She asked, because she was someone who needed the specific version, not the general one. It means you have a place to land while you figure out what comes next, he said. It means you have people who know your name and will notice if you're not there. It means shoes, he said. And the corner of his mouth moved slightly, actual shoes, not borrowed socks and bandana wraps. He paused. And it means that when my daughter drives back from her safe location and asks me to explain what happened this week, I'm going to introduce you to her. Because she's been asking about you since last night. Lily's expression did something complicated. She looked away from him toward the window, and her jaw tightened slightly in the way it did when she was working to contain something. She doesn't know me, Lily said. She knows what you did, Victor said. That's how it starts. Lily looked at the table. She ran her thumb along the edge of it back and forth, the fidgeting gesture of a person processing something that is larger than their composure can hold without an outlet. I don't need to be taken care of, she said. I know, Victor said. I've been handling things myself for 2 years. I know that too. So this isn't, she stopped. It's not charity, he said. It's not pity, and it's not a transaction. He looked at her directly. You stepped in front of 42 motorcycles for people you didn't know because you understood that what you did in that moment mattered. That's who you are. The people who are worth being around, they recognize that, and they don't walk away from it. Lily looked at him. Her eyes were bright. She didn't look away this time. You're saying I belong somewhere, she said. And the way she said it, not hopeful, not disbelieving, but careful, the way you held something fragile that you weren't sure yet was real, told him everything he needed to know about how long it had been since anyone had said that to her. I'm saying you already do, Victor said. You just didn't know it yet. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, he could hear his men beginning the organized movement of a group preparing to ride, the sounds of bikes being checked, conversations resuming the everyday register of people returning to normal life from something extraordinary. The sounds of 41 men who were alive to make noise because of the girl sitting across the table from him. Okay, Lily said. She said it the same way she'd said it the first time back on the highway when he'd told her she could ride with Colt. Quiet, careful, like she was being deliberate about it. But this time there was something underneath it that hadn't been there before. Something that sounded like a beginning. They rode out of Wendell's property 2 hours later. 42 bikes in formation, the morning fully established, and the road open and clean ahead of them. Victor rode point. Lily was behind him with Colt again, but something about her posture on the back of that bike was different from the first time. The grip wasn't white-knuckled and survival-oriented. It was steadier. It was like a person who had done something once and was now doing it with the confidence of someone who knew they were capable of it. Colt had noticed. He'd said something to her before they mounted up low and quick, and she'd laughed, actually laughed a real one, surprise out of her, and it had been a sound that Victor heard over the noise of everything around them, specific and clear. He filed it away. They stopped for fuel 3 hours in at a roadside station that was staffed by a man of about 70 who looked at 42 motorcycles pulling in with the expression of someone who had lived long enough to find most things more interesting than alarming. Lily came to stand near Victor while the bikes fueled. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. When you told Carver that what you wanted was for it to be over, that you had better things to do with your time. She paused. Did you mean me? Were you including me in that? Victor looked at her. He thought about the exact words he had used in that room. A 19-year-old girl who's been sleeping under rocks in the desert for 2 years. He had said it to Carver as a way of communicating proportion, the proportion between what Compass had nearly achieved and what had stopped it. But standing here now, he recognized that the words had also been something else. They had been a declaration of what mattered, said in front of a man who had decided that what mattered was $400 million in land value. Yes, he said. Lily nodded. She looked at the road ahead at the Yang open miles that ran toward the rest of the day and whatever came after. I haven't had anyone say that to me in a long time, she said, that I was something worth making decisions around. Get used to it, Victor said. She looked at him sideways. The corner of her mouth moved. The formation pulled back out onto the highway 40 minutes later. Victor rode at the front of it the way he always did, the desert moving past on both sides, the sky enormous and blue overhead, in the way that desert skies had of making everything underneath feel both small and exactly the right size. He thought about what the next weeks would hold. The work of rebuilding trust within the club, the careful, painful process of understanding what 3 years of compromised information had cost them and what needed to be shored up. The ongoing watch on Carver's response, which would come through Strickett within the day. The question of Eddie, which was not resolved and would not be for a long time. The documentation sitting with 3 reliable people doing its quiet work simply by existing. And Lily. The question of what Lily was and what she would become was not, he recognized, really a question at all. It had resolved itself somewhere between the highway and the kitchen table and the morning road in the way that certain things resolve themselves when you stop trying to categorize them and simply allowed them to be what they already were. She was someone who mattered. She was someone his daughter was going to meet on a Sunday and call him about afterward, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she had just encountered something she wanted to understand better. She was someone the 41 men behind him would tell a version of this story about 4 years, each version slightly different depending on the teller, but all of them containing the same essential truth that a girl with nothing had stood in a road and changed the direction of everything. 3 hours before they reached home, Lily's voice came through the radio connection Colt had set up on the second day of the small earpiece, practical Colt's solution to the problem of communication on a 5-hour ride. Victor, she said, first name. She had never used it before. She had called him nothing or referred to him by nothing, navigating the question of what to call him with the careful attentiveness she brought to everything. Yeah, he said, a pause. Thank you, she said. He thought about what she was thanking him for. He thought about the clean feet and the protein bar and the inclusion at the table and the night at Wendell's and the morning at the kitchen table and the word beginning. He thought about the 42 men behind him. Thank you, he said back, and he meant the full weight of it. She didn't respond, but through the earpiece he heard something, a breath, slow and steady, like a person settling into something they had decided to trust. The sound of a person who had been running on pure nerve for 2 years, finally finding a surface that would hold her weight. The road ran ahead of them toward home. At the end of the day, when the bikes came off the highway and the formation broke into the familiar rhythms of return, Victor pulled up in front of the club's main building and sat for a moment with the engine running, looking at the place he had built his life around. It looked the same as it always did. That was the thing about places, they didn't register what had happened while you were gone. They were just there, solid and continuous, waiting for you to bring what you had learned back into them. He killed the engine. Behind him, the sound died in sequence until there was only wind. Lily climbed off Colt's bike and stood in the quiet of the parking lot, looking at the building with the specific expression of someone seeing a place for the first time that they have already, in some unnameable way, recognized. Victor walked to stand beside her. Home base, he said. She looked at it. She looked at the men moving around them, finding their routines, calling to each other, the ordinary evening sounds of a group of people returning to where they belonged. She looked at Victor. Okay, she said, and this time the word had no careful qualification in it. No held breath, no waiting for the catch. It was just an okay, full and simple and real, Shuam. Word of a person who had decided that this right here was the answer to a question she had been carrying for 2 years without knowing it had an answer. The next morning, Victor's daughter drove in from the safe location at 9:30. He heard her before he saw her. She had his instinct for arrival timing and never announced herself any other way. She came through the main door and crossed the room to him and hugged him hard, the kind of hug that had nothing performed about it. You're okay, she said, muffled against his shoulder. I'm okay, he said. She pulled back and looked at his face the way she had done since she was small, checking the actual truth of what he said against what she could read there. She seemed to find them matching. Then she looked past him. Lily was across the room talking to Colt about something, her back to the door, unaware that anyone had come in. She had found a pair of actual sneakers courtesy of a trip with Dex to the nearest town, and they were new and slightly too white against the worn jeans, and her hair was clean, and she was gesturing as she talked with the loose easiness of someone who had forgotten in the last 12 hours to be braced. Victor's daughter looked at Lily for a moment. Then she looked at her father. That's her, she said. That's her, he said. His daughter nodded slowly. She had his jaw and her mother's intuition, and the combination had always been more effective than either alone. She stepped in front of 42 bikes, his daughter said. She did. Barefoot. Yes. For strangers. Yes. His daughter was quiet for a moment. She sounds like someone we should know, she said. Victor looked at Lily across the room, 19 years old and talking to Colt with her hands and laughing at something and completely unaware that she was being watched by the 2 people in this building who had the most reason to want her there. She is, he said. She's exactly someone we should know. Lily chose that moment to turn around the way people sometimes did when something in the air shifted. She turned and found Victor, and beside him, a young woman who had his eyes and was looking at her with an expression that was open and direct and completely without the social hedging that most people brought to first encounters. Lily went still for just a second. Then she walked across the room. And that was how it started. Not with ceremony, not with declaration, but with 3 people standing in a building at the end of an extraordinary 2 days and a hand extended, and a name exchanged in the particular quiet that settled over moments when something that was meant to be finally became exactly what it was. 42 men had ridden out 2 mornings ago and come home changed. A girl who had been invisible to the world had stepped into the road and refused to stay invisible anymore. A man who had nearly lost everything had discovered that the thing you were most likely to overlook was sometimes the thing that saved you. The desert highway was already becoming the kind of story that people told carefully and long. Not because it was dramatic, though it was, but because at its center was a truth that didn't need embellishment. That the measure of a person was not what they owned, or who knew their name, or how much road they had behind them. It was what they did in the moment when doing nothing was easier, when no one would have blamed them for looking away. When the cost of acting was real and the reward was uncertain, and the only thing driving them forward was the understanding bone deep and unargued that some things simply could not be left undone. A girl with nothing had saved 42 lives, and in doing so she had found the one thing she had been missing since she was 17 years old and running out a door into an uncertain world. She had found people who would not walk away, and that was the only home that had ever mattered.